There's a reason why Neville Goddard trained my grandfather to visualize what you want as if it's happening to you now, and you become that person already. And just like throughout Neville Goddard's books, he talks about visualization, and I'm going to explain why visualization, if you visualize correctly, that it's actually a direct line to your manifestation when you can do it correctly. Because with affirmations, because if you try to just do affirmations all the time and that's all you're doing, say you're saying, I am abundant, or I am successful, or I am this, or I am that. You could be saying these things, but what is the meaning behind that word to you unconsciously? Like, what is that word? What does that word mean to you? And you're the only one, you may not even know that. You may just think of the word abundant and rich, and you think that there's money connected to that. But your unconscious mind may not be connected to that. But if you visualize yourself counting $100 bills and having all of this money, and you have stacks of $100 bills that you're counting in your imagination, and you really feel the ownership of this while you're visualizing it, or you're imagining that you have everything that you desire, then there's going to be a connection with that abundant feeling from that. That's where the abundant feeling can be created. And that's why Neville Goddard taught my grandfather in the VIP meetings about visualization, about mastering this ability of visualization. And that's what I've been getting back into and trying to coach on this and teach people about, and how important visualization is, and having the faculty of your mind to be able to hold your attention on a visual scene within your mind and create that. And how important that is. And how important that is to just develop that part of your mind for everything in life. Because if you have if you have an attention span where you can hold on to one subject or one thing for long periods of time, you're going to be more successful than 99% of the world, just by simply having that direct, like a focus where you can focus on one thing for long periods of time, or you can sit somewhere in complete silence without watching your phone or watching Netflix or checking your emails or doing all this stuff. If you can just sit somewhere for 15 minutes just sit there and not move for 15 or 30 minutes, and have that attention to be able to catch your mind from wanting to go over here and maybe itch a scratch or something that you have, or your phone dings and you get a text message and you got to go answer it, real quick. Oh, who's that? Your mind, your attention span is so important to master this ability, because visualization is so important, because you never know what words actually mean to you unconsciously. You may be saying all these different affirmations, but what's the meaning behind that? What is the feeling that's being created within you, and the version of you that's being created from those actual words? Because that's why I talk about labels. Change the labels of certain words and certain things, like hard work. Why does hard work have to be labeled hard work? Because listen, and the reason why I say that is because we have certain labels on certain things. So what is your label on the affirmation that you have? What is the underlying unconscious feeling state that you get by saying, I am abundant, or I am rich, or I am loved? What is the ultimate feeling? What is the unconscious feeling state that you're getting from that? And you can figure all this out within meditation. When you learn to still the mind and you say these things to yourself, you say, I am abundant, or I am loved. What are the pictures coming up in your imagination unconsciously connected to from those affirmations? And if you're very observant, you can see the actual images that come into your mind, because imagination creates reality. And this is the process of it. And I've figured all this stuff out by being very still and being very present and being very cognizant. And I studied and mastered this stuff while I was in prison. I was in solitary confinement for half a year. 175 days I was in there. And I was just meditating for hours and hours a day. And what I found was the thinking, your inner dialogue, your inner talking, that is the beginning of everything from your state of consciousness. And then from that inner talking is created images in your imagination from the inner talking, whatever it may be, unconscious or conscious, whatever. It's usually unconscious. but there's images coming up in your mind from that inner dialogue. And then from those images, depending on how well your attention is and how clearly focused you are in your own world, how clearly defined those images are. Okay, and from those images, feeling states are created. That's what creates the feeling states, and then impressed into the subconscious mind, and then reflected out in the outer world. Because imagination creates reality, but how vivid of an imagination do you have? But the inner dialogue creates the images in your mind. Those images create the feeling, whatever that feeling is, and then that feeling is then impressed into the subconscious with an identity of what the subconscious believes that you are within your world. And then it reflects that, it outpictures that within the simulation, and then shifts you to that world that corresponds with your identity of who you are being. Okay? So remember that. And when you say, because I would catch myself doing this, I would say certain words with my inner dialogue, and then I would see what the pictures were that were coming up in my mind from my imagination. And they were usually a lot different. Like love. If I say love, all of a sudden I would get like a picture of something that happened in my past that was the complete opposite. And then I would get like a nasty feeling state from that affirmation or saying that word, love. And that it was creating the wrong things to come into my life. And I was creating that feeling state of hatred or trauma from me thinking about love. From me saying the word, I am loved. It was bringing back old pictures from my traumatic past, and then bringing those back up, and then I'm falling into that feeling state. And then it's being recreated in my world, because then the subconscious mind is then feeling all this stuff. But the reason why I bring all this stuff up is because you can go into a meditation and discover this stuff yourself. Simply ask yourself certain words, or use your inner dialogue and say certain words, and then see the images that come in your mind. Because this could solve a lot of, questions that you have about your reality. Because I hear it all the time. People, I'm affirming this, I'm affirming this, I'm affirming this, and nothing's happening. Robotic affirmations. What if you're using robotic affirmations, I am abundant a million times, but abundance means poverty to you unconsciously. Then you're creating more poverty to come in your life, because as soon as you say abundance, you have this image of poverty pops up in your mind from something that happened to you 10 years ago. And then that feeling is based on poverty that is essentially being created from you saying, I am abundant a million times a day. So what I'm saying is, this is why visualization is so important, and it can supersede affirmations and everything else, because you're skipping the inner dialogue. You're going straight to your imagination, and you're forming an experience that is abundant, that is love, like what you define as love in the present moment. You're creating this scene that implies that this is already done, or you're being loved, or you are abundant, or somebody's giving you something or congratulating you, and creating this, this image in your mind, this mental movie. And from that mental movie, you're going to get those specific, feeling states from that. So remember that as you're going through this, how important that is. Visualization. This is why Neville Goddard taught visualization. This is why he taught my grandfather that at the Wilshire Ebell Theater. And is why I emphasize visualization and, establishing your focus and your present moment awareness, knowing you're living in a simulation, so that way it makes it effortless. That way you start eliminating the blocks with that. So go into a brief meditation and ask yourself certain things, and be very present with the affirmations that you're using, and see what pictures are coming up in your mind from those affirmations. And you'll discover a lot of things from that. Or just go into a meditation and see what the pictures are coming up automatically too. I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next one.